Tonight, we embark on a journey through the dirty, unwashed reality of medieval life, where water was not a luxury, but a threat. Hygiene was best left to fate, and soap was something people feared more than the plague. Before we begin, go ahead, get comfortable. Subscribe if you enjoy falling asleep to history that makes you grateful for modern plumbing, and prepare to drift into a world where cleanliness was considered a terrible, terrible idea. You wake up. The air is thick, carrying the scent of sweat, damp wool, and a strong dose of, "I haven't bathed in 6 months, and I feel fine about it." This is normal, because bathing is dangerous. At least, that's what you've been told since childhood. Your mother warned you that water weakens the body, stripping away your natural defenses, and leaving you vulnerable to chills, disease, and, worst of all, the judgmental stares of people who think you're taking hygiene a bit too seriously. She told you stories of men who bathed too often, who scrubbed away their protective layer of filth, and who promptly caught fevers and died, proving once and for all that baths are obviously the work of dark forces. You believed her, because she wasn't the only one who said it. The town healer preached the dangers of excessive washing, claiming that warm water opened your pores and invited sickness right into your body, like some sort of villain sneaking into a castle after the gates have been left open. The priests agreed, warning that too much concern for cleanliness was vanity, and vanity led to sin, and sin led to eternal suffering, which is significantly worse than just smelling bad. So here you are, perfectly unbathed, perfectly protected, and perfectly resigned to the fact that this is just how medieval life works. The morning sun creeps into the cracks of the old wooden shutters, illuminating the fine layer of dust that has settled over your belongings. A layer that, much like the rest of your environment, has not been disturbed by anything resembling cleanliness in quite some time. You stretch, rubbing sleep from your eyes, knowing full well that you will not be rinsing your face with water. Why would you? Everyone knows water is risky, a slippery slope toward weakened health, open pores, and diseases sneaking in like unwanted guests at a feast. Instead, you do what everyone else does. You grab a rough piece of cloth, wipe away the worst of the grime, and call it good enough. And good enough is the foundation of medieval hygiene. Your neighbor, an elderly man who believes bathing to be a direct offense against nature itself, passes by your window, adjusting his tunic as he prepares for another day of being untouched by water in any form. You once asked him how often he bathed. He scoffed. "Sick men bathe," he said, spitting into the dirt for emphasis. "A strong man wears his filth like armor," and honestly, given the state of medical knowledge, he may have a point. The town healer, a man who believes sweating is the body's way of purging itself of evil spirits, warned against bathing more than once a season. Too much washing strips the body of its defenses, he explained, waving a finger toward a group of younger men who had made the mistake of rinsing off in the nearby river last week. 2 of them had developed fevers shortly after. Obviously, the bath caused it. Not the questionable drinking water, not the lack of nutrition, not the fact that medieval life was just wildly unfair and made survival difficult for everyone involved. No. The bath was to blame. You take this warning seriously. Your hands may be stained with work, your clothes stiff with layers of dust and sweat, but you are strong. Or at least, you believe you are. Because belief is what keeps medieval hygiene alive and well. You go about your day, weaving through the crowded streets, careful not to bump into too many people, because the mingling of unwashed bodies creates an atmosphere so thick It could be bottled and sold as medieval perfume. But no one complains. No one notices. Because it's normal. Personal scents are not a concern, nor are lingering stains on tunics, or the occasional streaks of mystery filth clinging to sleeves. The body regulates itself, or so people say. Your mother once told you that the body absorbs the world around it, forming a natural layer of protection, much like a well-worn coat that shields against the elements. And when she said this, she was not joking, because this protective layer, it is very real. You see it in the deep brown streaks on men's hands, where years of toil have settled permanently into the skin. You see it in the cracked feet of traveling merchants, who rarely bother with footwear because a thick layer of dirt serves just as well. You see it in the calloused arms of soldiers, whose sweat-drenched tunics have long abandoned any hope of smelling anything other than battle and regret. These are proofs of strength, signs of a body untouched by the dangerous temptation of baths. And that alone should make you proud. Even so, there is a bathhouse in town, tucked between the market stalls and the old stone bridge that leans just slightly more than it should. It is filled with whispers, both of those who dare to enter and those who warn against it. Some claim that only the reckless visit. Men with too much coin and too little concern for their own well-being. Others say that it is not just the water that is dangerous, but the people inside, the gossip that spreads, the vulnerability of being scrubbed clean and exposed to the cold air afterward, because nothing invites sickness like freshly washed skin. You pass by its entrance, catching the scent of steaming water, the faint notes of mint and rosemary. A sign that someone has attempted to mask the presence of risk with fragrant deception. And you resist, because you are not foolish enough to bathe today. You are strong, and strength is earned through suffering. You press forward, leaving the bathhouse behind, resisting the strangely inviting scent of warm water and false promises of hygiene. Because you know better. The road winds through the village, lined with market stalls, where merchants shout the praises of their goods, fresh bread, dried fish, bolts of linen, and bottled concoctions that claim to cleanse the body without the reckless interference of water. One such seller stands proudly, waving a clay jar in the air, promising that his herbal powder will rid you of sweat, filth, and misfortune without the need for dangerous bathing rituals. You watch as a skeptical man inspects the jar, rubbing a pinch of powder between his fingers, sniffing cautiously before frowning deeply. It smells of burnt rosemary and regret. He mutters. The merchant, undeterred, launches into a passionate defense, insisting that his blend is used by noble families who understand the dangers of excessive washing, and that the greatest minds of the kingdom have abandoned water entirely in favor of his superior cleansing method. The skeptical man does not look convinced, nor do you. But still, it is a tempting alternative. Because you are not bathing today. You are strong, and strength is earned through resisting unnecessary cleanliness. Further down the road, near the entrance to the town tavern, a group of men argue bitterly over the risks of bathing. One insists that an occasional wash is necessary, especially for men who work in the fields, covered in sweat, dirt, and occasional livestock disasters. The others scoff, waving his suggestion away, as though he has personally offended them.
"You'll ruin your skin!"
One shouts. "You'll catch your death from cold!" Another adds. "You'll be mistaken for a noble and forced to pay extra taxes." A third suggests, earning nods of grim approval. The argument continues, growing louder, more absurd, until the tavern keeper steps outside, shaking his head in frustration. "You lot stink," he says, voice flat. There is a long pause. A brief flicker of realization, a moment of doubt, before one of the men lifts his chin defiantly. That is our strength, he declares, as if he has won the debate entirely. And in a way, he probably has, because here, bathing is weakness, and weakness is unacceptable. The sun drifts toward midday, casting sharp beams of light across the town square, revealing details that were better left unseen. The fine dust clinging to every surface, the streaks of grime trailing across doorways, the unfortunate evidence of medieval life's deep rejection of hygiene. But here, no one cares. Because bathing remains the greatest risk, the most unnecessary indulgence, the luxury of fools. You pass a merchant stall displaying fine linen cloth, its seller boasting that his fabric absorbs sweat so effectively. It eliminates the need for washing. A miracle, truly. Because if a simple tunic can do the work of an entire bath, then who are you to argue against progress? You overhear a debate near the well, where a group of town elders discuss the latest sickness sweeping the countryside. One of them insists it is caused by excessive bathing. Another claims it is a punishment from the heavens, a warning against indulgence, unnecessary cleanliness, and the reckless abandonment of filth as nature intended. A third man simply nods, adjusting his stiff, sweat-soaked collar, proudly declaring that he has avoided bathing for over a decade, a feat that earns him a respectful nod from his peers. A decade without bathing, an accomplishment in medieval society, a tragedy by any modern standard. But here it is proof of wisdom. You do not question it. You do not argue. You simply move on, knowing that water is best left to the rivers, the streams, and the people foolish enough to trust it. Evening settles in, the sky turning deep shades of red and gold, and the bathhouse stands quiet, its entrance shadowed, waiting for those brave enough to seek it out. You see a figure step inside, hesitant, shoulders tense, as though the weight of his decision lingers behind him like a ghost. And you wonder, tomorrow, will people whisper of his sickness? Will they warn others of his mistake? Speaking his name in hushed tones, telling cautionary tales of men who bathe too often, who scrub away their strength, who succumb to fever and regret. You shake the thought away, because tonight you remain untouched by water. Tonight you remain safe from its dangers. The night settles, bringing the familiar weight of stagnant air, damp wool, and a faint scent of candle wax, mixed with the reality of medieval existence. You adjust your blankets, careful not to disturb the fine layer of dust that has claimed its rightful place over the past few weeks. Because what is dust, truly, if not a reminder of natural protection? Some say it is unfortunate, a sign of neglect, of a household forgotten by the concept of tidiness. But here it is normal, necessary, a layer of history settling into fabric, untouched by reckless hands that dare to disturb its presence. You sleep soundly, knowing that cleanliness is not something to chase, it is something to avoid. And yet, just outside, the bathhouse remains open, its quiet presence a temptation for those who do not know better. A flickering lantern sways near its doorway, casting soft golden light onto damp cobblestones, marking the path for fools who believe water is their friend. You turn over, pulling the blankets tighter, because you will not be fooled tonight, because you know better, because you are medieval, and medieval survival demands sacrifices, and if that sacrifice is avoiding baths for the sake of health, then so be it. You accept your fate, much like your ancestors before you. Tomorrow you will wake, untouched by water, confident that your filth is what keeps you strong. Because what is strength, if not resisting unnecessary baths? If you think being rich in medieval times meant you lived in luxury, surrounded by clean, elegant spaces, let me stop you right there. Because medieval wealth did not equal medieval hygiene. Sure, nobles had finer clothes, grand halls, and food that didn't involve questionable meat from last winter. But when it came to cleanliness, everything was just a slightly more expensive disaster. Let's begin. The nobleman wakes up, stretching beneath a pile of thick woolen blankets, his fine linen nightshirt clinging slightly to his skin. Because yes, even the rich sweat through their clothes. And no, it does not smell pleasant. His chamber is grand, adorned with tapestries, showcasing scenes of battle, hunting, and possibly a knight stabbing a deer for absolutely no reason. It's impressive. It's also covered in dust, because medieval rooms were not cleaned unless absolutely necessary. And even when they were cleaned, the process involved more sweeping things around than actually removing filth. If his castle was particularly advanced, he might have a servant dedicated to dusting, which means that once a week, someone walks in, looks at the layer of dirt settled on the wooden beams, wipes a few spots with a cloth, and calls it a job well done. Now, for breakfast. The nobleman does not dine alone, because medieval meals are social affairs where people gather around long wooden tables, picking food off shared platters with their bare hands. Forks, unnecessary. Napkins, for the weak. Instead, guests simply wipe their greasy fingers on whatever fabric they happen to be wearing. Whether it's their sleeve, their tunic, or, if they're feeling particularly refined, a corner of the communal tablecloth. Speaking of the tablecloth, this fine piece of fabric serves a dual purpose. It is both decoration and towel, used by guests to clean their hands throughout the meal, absorbing centuries of food stains and questionable decisions. Did it ever get properly washed? That's uncertain. What is certain is that everyone pretended it was perfectly fine and carried on as if it wasn't horrifying. And now, let's talk about castles. If you think grand medieval castles smelled fresh, elegant, and regal, let me personally crush that illusion. Because castles were disgusting. They were cold, damp, filled with people, and worst of all, they had horrifying waste management systems, which is just a fancy way of saying people relieved themselves in places they absolutely shouldn't. A particularly wealthy lord might have a private chamber pot, which was fine, until someone had to empty it, preferably out the window, where the contents joined the unfortunate fate of many medieval streets. Even in castles with actual latrines, the sewage often drained into nearby moats or streams, meaning that whatever body of water surrounded the castle became something no one should ever touch, smell, or think about. And yet, people lived like this. They accepted it. They carried on, wrapped in fine silk cloaks, believing they were living the height of luxury, while actively ignoring the fact that the hallway smelled like centuries of poor life choices. So yes, medieval wealth meant better clothes, bigger meals, and occasionally having a servant wipe the dust off things. But when it came to actual hygiene, everything was just a dirtier version of rich. Now, let's talk about how medieval nobles masked their questionable hygiene with perfumes, bizarre cleaning rituals, and the stunning ability to pretend everything was fine. Despite the questionable state of cleanliness, medieval nobility refused to acknowledge that their lives were anything but refined. If bathing was risky and washing was debatable, then what was the solution? Perfume, and not just a casual spritz, but a full, aggressive masking of reality, where scents became the first and last defense against hygiene-related regrets. The wealthiest nobles imported lavish oils and powders, rubbing fragrant herbs into their clothes, drenching fabrics in floral water, convinced that if they smelled good, they must be clean. This created a unique medieval experience, where people would enter grand halls, covered in layers of scent so strong, it could practically knock out anyone standing too close. Did it actually help? Absolutely not. But did people pretend it helped? Oh, they absolutely did. Because when you're rich, and people expect you to look effortlessly composed, you simply throw lavender at the problem and carry on. For those who couldn't afford imported perfumes, other methods existed. Some would carry bundles of herbs, tucking sprigs of mint, rosemary, and thyme into their sleeves, convincing themselves that this was essentially the same as bathing. Others would simply dose their clothing in scented oils, meaning that while their bodies remained untouched by water, their outer layers smelled convincingly tolerable. A particularly bold strategy involved carrying pomanders, small, decorative balls filled with spices and dried flowers. These were not just accessories. They were weapons against reality, deployed whenever an unfortunate odor threatened to ruin the illusion of medieval refinement. Picture this: a noble enters a hall, already sweating through his fine, embroidered tunic, realizing the scent of roasted meats and slightly questionable wine is mixing unpleasantly with the layers of perfume clinging to his skin. The solution: whip out the pomander, hold it close, pretend everything is perfectly normal, continue drinking. Congratulations. You've survived another medieval gathering without questioning the true state of your hygiene. Despite the noble attempts to mask reality with layers of perfume, fragrant oils, and deeply questionable self-confidence, the truth remained: everything was still dirty. And nowhere was this more obvious than in the grand dining halls of the wealthy, where extravagant feasts were held on tables that had not been properly cleaned in, well, ever. Picture this: a long wooden table, polished by time and generations of messy eaters, where medieval lords and ladies dine without forks, grabbing hunks of meat directly from shared platters, tearing bread with their bare hands, and wiping their fingers on whatever fabric happens to be nearby. If you're lucky, it's a designated tablecloth. If you're unlucky, it's someone's sleeve. And if you're really unlucky, it's your sleeve. Does anyone complain? Absolutely not. Because complaining about filth in medieval society is like complaining about the air. It is simply a part of life, and questioning it would require a level of awareness that no one is ready for. Now, let's talk about the floors. Medieval castle floors were not just surfaces for walking. They were functional tools for waste disposal, forgotten crumbs, and occasionally livestock. A grand banquet would conclude, leaving chicken bones scattered beneath chairs, bits of cheese trampled underfoot, and traces of wine spilled across the uneven stone. Soaking into the rushes, layers of straw or dried herbs spread across the floors to keep things comfortable-ish. These rushes, once fresh and pleasant, quickly absorbed every foul thing imaginable, creating a carpet of pure medieval suffering. Some servants would replace them occasionally, sweeping away layers of filth, only to spread new layers over whatever grime remained. Did this solve the problem? No. Did people believe it solved the problem? Absolutely. Because as long as you pretended the filth was invisible, it wasn't actually there. And now, let's visit the nobleman's bedchamber, where the grand illusion of medieval wealth meets the brutal truth of poor sanitation. His bed. An impressive wooden frame adorned with thick curtains, decorated with fine embroidered sheets that have absorbed years of sweat, dust, and poorly managed temperature control. Servants would shake the bedding out occasionally, flinging whatever clung to the fabric into the air, where it would settle gently over every other surface in the room. Did anyone consider washing the sheets? Not frequently, because laundering fine fabrics was a long, tedious process, and most nobles simply relied on fresh layers of perfume to convince themselves they were clean. Even his pillow, stuffed with feathers or straw, occasionally freshened with lavender to distract from whatever was lurking beneath, was a silent witness to generations of unwashed history. And yet, here he sleeps, here he wakes, here he carries himself through life, untouched by bathwater, convinced he is the height of refinement. Because in medieval society, cleanliness was just a matter of perspective. Now imagine you were the cleanest person in medieval Europe. A walking scandal, a threat to tradition, a man who bathed far too often for society to handle. You wake up feeling fresh, suspiciously fresh, because unlike your neighbors, you have committed the most reckless act imaginable. You washed yourself twice this week. You step into the town square, where the air is thick with dust, sweat, and the lingering essence of people who have never once questioned their hygiene choices. You expect nods of greeting, perhaps a polite wave. Instead, you receive stares, long, quiet stares, because everyone has noticed. Your skin, too clean. Your clothes, not stiff with layers of sweat. Your presence, far too tolerable. And worst of all, you smell like a person who has seen water recently. The whispers begin immediately. He bathes too often. Someone mutters. A dangerous habit? Another agrees. He'll catch his death before winter. An elder warns, nodding as though this is already decided. A child, barely old enough to understand medieval paranoia, points at you, eyes wide with pure terror. Look, he shouts. His face isn't dirty. And just like that, the whole town confirms their suspicions. You have lost your protective layer of filth. You have weakened your defenses. You have tempted fate, and it will absolutely punish you for it. You walk into the tavern, hoping to escape the ridiculous stares, but the moment you step inside, every conversation stops. Even the drunkard, who has been singing about cheese theft for the last 3 days, pauses mid-verse. The tavern keeper narrows his eyes, wiping a mug with a cloth so filthy, it actively makes the cup worse. You've been swimming in the river again. The words hang in the air, carrying the weight of concern, judgment, and mild disgust. You nod, admitting the truth. Yes, you took a bath this morning. The reactions vary, but none are good. One man leans away, as if cleanliness is contagious and must be avoided immediately. Another examines you, wondering what crime you must be covering up, because no one bathes this much. Unless they have something to hide. A woman, unimpressed by your choices, folds her arms and delivers the final warning. You'll regret it, sooner or later. And just like that, your fate is sealed. The elders will shake their heads when they pass you in the streets. The town healer will prepare his worst remedies, convinced that your reckless washing habits have doomed you to sickness. The children will mock you, pointing out every time you fail to gather a proper layer of medieval survival dirt. Because in this town, no one bathes regularly and lives to tell the tale. Or at least, that's what everyone believes. The warning lingers, hanging in the smoky tavern air like a prophecy of doom. You sip your drink slowly, ignoring the way people shift away, their eyes darting toward your suspiciously clean hands, as if touching too much water has rendered you fundamentally untrustworthy. You overhear whispers. He'll be sick before the week is done. Doesn't he know baths drain a man's strength? Probably cursed now. You set down your mug, pretending not to notice the way the tavern keeper subtly wipes the spot. where you touched the table, as if your cleanliness itself is contaminating his establishment. And perhaps, to them, it is. Because medieval society thrives on filth, it is a protective barrier, a survival tactic, a deeply respected tradition. And you have broken the unspoken law of hygiene. So now, you will suffer their judgment. Now, let's step outside the tavern, away from the gossip, into the wider, filth-ridden reality of medieval life. Because even if you're not bathing too often, everything around you is still absolutely disgusting. Take the streets, for example. The roads are lined with market stalls, bustling with merchants selling fresh produce, cloth, questionable meats, and potions that promise to cure every illness imaginable. But these roads are also the town's waste disposal system. Because when people need to get rid of something, anything, really, it goes straight into the streets. Leftover food, thrown outside, used hay from livestock bedding, right into the road, human waste, tossed out the window with the casual confidence of someone who truly does not care. Sure, there are laws in some cities that try to limit how much filth people can casually dump into the streets, but enforcement is not great. Meaning that, at any given moment, you're stepping over layers of waste, forgotten scraps, and the grim legacy of a town that refuses to question its sanitation choices. And let's not forget the livestock roaming freely, leaving behind their own generous contributions to the medieval walking experience. So whether you bathe or not, you are absolutely stepping in filth daily. And the worst part, no one cares. Now, back to personal hygiene. What happens if you can't bathe, but you still want to stay somewhat clean? The answer is simple. You invent absurd alternatives and pretend they work. Some medieval people would wipe themselves down with cloth, convinced that rubbing dirt around was basically the same as washing. Others would scrape their skin with dry brushes, removing the top layer of grime while absolutely ignoring the fact that they should probably just use water. And then, of course, there were the herbal powders, perfumes, and scented oils, which nothing to actually clean the body, but made people smell slightly less awful. Does this help? Not really. But did people convince themselves it helped? Absolutely. Because the goal was never actual cleanliness. It was maintaining the illusion of hygiene, while avoiding the horrifying risks of bathwater. And now, let's talk about medieval hospitals. If you think hospitals were clean, sterile places where people were treated with careful medical knowledge, I regret to inform you that medieval hospitals were just slightly better than complete chaos. Doctors often believed bad smells carried disease, meaning that if an area smelled particularly awful, it was considered highly dangerous. Did this lead to better hygiene practices? Absolutely not. Instead, it led to more incense, more burning herbs, and more desperation to mask reality rather than fix it. And hospital beds. Let's just say you didn't want to stay in one for long. Because sheets were rarely changed, patients lay in their own filth, and medical treatment often involved bleeding, cutting, and applying random substances that absolutely did not help. So if you walked into a medieval hospital clean, you would not leave that way. And once again, water was not the solution. Because bathing after an illness was considered risky, leaving people to recover under layers of sweat, perfume, and pure medieval determination. Let's talk about medieval teeth. If you've ever wondered how people kept their teeth clean without toothpaste, toothbrushes, or even the basic understanding of cavities, the answer is simple: they mostly didn't. Sure, some people chewed on herbs or twigs, using bits of cloth to wipe their teeth, believing that scrubbing with dry fabric was essentially the same as dental care. but actual preventative care. Forget about it. Your options were limited, and medieval dentists, if you could even call them that, were closer to enthusiastic butchers than actual healthcare professionals. If you had a rotten tooth, no slow treatments, no careful procedures, just immediate removal. The town blacksmith might even help with extractions, because if a man can pull metal from a furnace, surely he can yank a tooth from your mouth too. You might be wondering, did medieval people suffer horribly from tooth pain? Absolutely. Did they think sugar caused it? No, don't be ridiculous. They blamed it on everything else, including bad spirits, curses, cold weather, and occasionally just personal bad luck. And if you needed relief from the pain, someone might give you alcohol and tell you to stop complaining. Did it help? Not even a little. But did you have other options? Not unless you liked the idea of having your tooth pulled out by a man who fixes wagon wheels for a living. Now, let's talk about laundry. Because while bathing was rare, clothes still needed washing. Sort of. The process of cleaning clothes was wildly inefficient, relying on soaking fabrics in lye or stale urine to remove stains. That's right, urine was considered an excellent cleaning agent. Why? Because it contained ammonia, and ammonia helped break down dirt. Was this effective? Shockingly, yes. Was this disgusting? Beyond words. So while people avoided bathing, their clothes were occasionally scrubbed with solutions that should never, ever be mentioned in polite conversation. And after this horrifying process, clothes were laid out to dry, freshly cleaned, carrying both the scent of regret and the questionable methods of medieval laundering. But you know what? No one complained. Because if it worked, it worked. And medieval life wasn't about comfort. It was about survival through sheer ignorance. And finally, let's visit the town butcher. Because sanitation in medieval markets. Uncontrolled chaos. Meat was displayed openly, exposed to the elements, touched by unwashed hands, and occasionally nibbled on by passing rodents that no one bothered chasing away. It wasn't uncommon to see a butcher wipe his knife on his apron, which had already absorbed years of blood, grease, and questionable choices. Did people care? Not really. Did they eat the meat anyway? Of course. Because what other choice did they have? Sure, some people believed bad meat could cause sickness, but others argued that if you simply cooked it long enough, all problems disappeared. And if someone did get sick from eating spoiled food, they wouldn't blame the butcher's sanitation habits. They'd blame spirits, curses, or perhaps just an unfortunate alignment of the stars. Because in medieval Europe, it was never filth that hurt you. It was unseen forces that probably hated you personally. Now, let's step deeper into the absolutely disgusting reality of medieval food, disease, and the dangerously creative ways people justified eating things that should not be eaten. Because if medieval hygiene was bad, medieval food safety was even worse. Let's start with bread, the staple of nearly every medieval diet. At first glance, bread seems safe, simple, familiar, just flour and water, maybe a bit of yeast if someone was feeling extra fancy. But medieval bread had a secret horror sometimes. It contained hallucinogenic mold. That's right, rye bread, when left in damp conditions, could develop ergot fungus, which caused wild hallucinations, convulsions, and occasionally, mass hysteria. Did people know this? Not really. Did entire villages sometimes suffer from bizarre outbreaks of cursed visions? Because everyone ate contaminated bread? Oh, absolutely. Imagine waking up, grabbing a nice chunk of rye bread, taking a bite, and within hours, the entire town is convinced they're experiencing a supernatural event. People saw demons, believed their skin was burning, and occasionally just ran through the streets screaming because reality itself had betrayed them. And did medieval doctors connect this to spoiled bread? No, they blamed witches, spirits, and occasionally just bad luck. Which means people kept eating it, because avoiding bread would be ridiculous. Now, let's move on to meat. If you think medieval people had any concept of refrigeration, I regret to inform you that spoiled meat was just a part of life. Sure, they salted and smoked their food to preserve it, but that didn't always work perfectly. Which meant people had to get creative when their meat started turning strange colors. For example, some believed that if you cooked bad meat long enough, it would become fine again. Spoiled. Just boil it harder. Smells off. Just add more spices. Has turned an unsettling shade of green. Well, maybe don't ask too many questions. Because if this is the only food available, you're eating it no matter what. And did people sometimes die from food poisoning? Oh, frequently. But did they ever blame their meal? Of course not. They blamed spirits, curses, or perhaps just the stars aligning against them once again. Now, let's discuss medieval drinks, because while water was technically available, it was often unsafe, leading people to rely on ale, cider, and watered down wine instead. And when I say water was unsafe, I mean it often contained enough bacteria to stage a full rebellion inside your body. A city river, for example, would be filled with whatever waste people had tossed into it, yet still considered a reasonable option if boiled enough times or mixed with enough alcohol. And when water wasn't available, people drank literally anything else. Weak ale was a favorite, and even children drank it, because at least it wasn't full of parasites. Did this mean medieval life involved being mildly buzzed at all times? Yes. Was that considered a problem? Absolutely not. Because when your other option was dying from bad water, ale suddenly became a responsible choice. And finally, let's visit the absolute disaster that was medieval kitchens. If you stepped into a medieval kitchen, expecting organized cooking stations, food storage, and cleanliness, oh, you would be disappointed. Medieval kitchens were hot, smoky, and covered in grease, with cooks sweating through layers of wool, working with rusted knives, questionable pots, and a complete lack of sanitation standards. The meat hung on hooks, exposed to the elements, sometimes accompanied by flies that no one even bothered chasing away anymore. Live chickens, pigs, or goats occasionally wandered through the kitchen, simply existing until someone decided it was time for them to become dinner. And when food fell on the floor, doesn't matter. Just pick it up and put it back on the table. Because in medieval life, you ate what was available, and if you questioned food safety too much, you'd simply starve. So yes, medieval hygiene was bad, but medieval food, it was actively trying to kill you. And now, let's dive into how medieval medicine handled the consequences of poor hygiene, bad food, and mysterious sicknesses. Spoiler, it was not helpful. Now, let's venture deep into the disaster that was medieval healthcare, where doctors had no understanding of germs. Medical tools were rinsed at best, reused at worst, and treatments ranged from mildly ineffective to actively making things worse. Because if there's one thing medieval medicine excelled at, it was confidently doing the wrong thing. Let's start with disease prevention, which, spoiler, did not exist in any reasonable way. People believed that sickness was caused by bad air, curses, sins, or simply existing in the presence of unfortunate planetary alignments. So how did they attempt to prevent illness? Oh, by doing things that absolutely did not help at all. For example, during plagues, people carried strong-smelling herbs and wore ridiculous masks, believing that if they could block out the bad air, they could avoid getting sick. Did this work? Not even slightly. But did people believe it worked? Of course, because science was just a vague suggestion at this point. Now, let's talk about actual medieval medical treatment, which was a bold mixture of guesswork, superstition, and deeply questionable logic. If you had an infection, a medieval doctor might bleed you, because apparently losing blood made everything better, even though it actively made everything worse. They also applied hot metal to wounds, because searing flesh was considered a valid way to prevent further sickness. Did this help? Sometimes, purely by accident. Did it cause horrific scarring and traumatize the patient? Oh, absolutely. And if they didn't have fire or blades available, they rubbed crushed herbs on open wounds, hoping that nature would take care of the problem. Sometimes the herbs were vaguely medicinal. Sometimes they were just plants people grabbed because they looked healing adjacent. And when everything else failed, doctors would simply mutter something about balancing the humus and send the patient home, hoping for the best. Speaking of medical logic, let's discuss the theory of the four humours, which was the foundation of medieval medicine, and also completely wrong. Doctors believed that the body was controlled by four fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, and any sickness was caused by an imbalance of these mystical substances. This meant that every illness had solutions that made no sense. Feeling weak? Add more blood. Feeling feverish? Drain the blood. Feeling nauseous? No need to check for food poisoning. Just assume your bile is too yellow today. And if something truly unusual happened, like a patient developing strange symptoms, doctors didn't look for causes. They just declared, the humours are displeased, and hoped the patient sorted it out on their own. Now, let's descend into the darkest depths of medieval medicine, where surgeries were performed with blunt tools, cures were wild guesses, and the plague was met with treatments so ridiculous they actively made things worse. Because medieval doctors, they had confidence. They did not have knowledge. Let's start with surgery, which was less about precision and more about hoping the patient didn't scream too loudly. There was no anesthesia, unless you count a strong drink and a deeply concerning pep talk as proper pain management. A battlefield surgeon, for example, might perform an amputation using nothing but a saw, some linen bandages, and a deep sense of denial. Did he clean his tools? Not really. Did he believe infection was caused by germs? Absolutely not, because germs hadn't been discovered yet. Did patients often die from post-surgery infections? Oh, constantly. And yet, medieval doctors would pat themselves on the back, declaring the operation a success, because the leg had been removed, and that was technically the goal. Now, let's talk about the plague, because medieval people had no idea how to handle it, and their attempts were truly baffling. During outbreaks, people tried everything, including burning herbs and spices to purify the air. Spoiler, this did absolutely nothing. Whipping themselves in public, believing that self-punishment would remove the disease, it did not. Drinking weird concoctions, like crushed emeralds mixed into wine, because medieval logic was just put expensive things in liquid and hope for the best. Carrying dried toads as plague protection, because apparently someone decided frogs were immune to illness. They were not. Avoiding baths even more aggressively, fearing that clean skin would invite disease, which, ironically, made things worse. And if none of these worked, doctors resorted to the ultimate medieval cure, bleeding the patient. Because, in their minds, if removing some blood didn't cure the plague, nothing would. Did this help? Not at all. Did people still believe in it? Absolutely. Because logic was not a requirement in medieval medicine. Now, let's plunge into the most catastrophic failures of medieval doctors, the worst cures they ever invented, and the truly shocking treatments people actually paid for, all while basking in the sheer filth that society accepted as normal. Because medieval medicine, it was more of a horror show than a healthcare system. Let's start with the ridiculous cures people paid good money for. Because medieval doctors were less concerned with science and more focused on confident nonsense. If you suffered from headaches, a doctor might suggest pressing a dead mole against your forehead because, apparently, lifeless rodents absorb pain. If you had fever, you might be prescribed ground-up pearls because swallowing expensive things was considered a legitimate treatment method. Did it work? Not at all, but at least you could die fabulously. And if you had epilepsy, oh, medieval doctors had a particularly wild cure for that. They believed drinking human blood could help. That's right, human blood. Because apparently, if you were suffering from seizures, the logical solution was to casually commit minor cannibalism. Did people actually do this? Oh, disturbingly often. Now, let's talk about filth in medical practices, because medieval hospitals were just germ-infested rooms where people lay around hoping not to die. Doctors did not clean their tools. In fact, it was completely normal to reuse surgical blades without washing them. And bandages. Reused. Again and again. Because why throw out a perfectly good strip of cloth just because it was covered in someone else's wound fluids and hospital beds? Let's just say that once a patient passed away, the bed was not thoroughly cleaned before the next person used it. It was just shaken out a bit, maybe sprinkled with herbs, and declared ready for the next unfortunate soul. Did this spread infections? Constantly. Did medieval doctors make the connection? No, they blamed the patient for not being strong enough. And now, let's discuss the absolute worst treatments medieval doctors ever invented. Because somehow things get even more horrifying. One of the most infamous? Trepanation. This was the medieval practice of drilling a hole into a patient's skull to release evil spirits. The idea was simple. If someone suffered from migraines, mental illness, seizures, or just vaguely unfortunate vibes, the solution was to make an opening in their head and hope the problem leaked out. Did people actually survive this? Shockingly, some did. Did it ever actually cure anything? Absolutely not. But medieval doctors loved doing it anyway. And what about treatments for the bubonic plague? One of the worst ideas was covering patients in live chickens, because someone decided chicken bodies absorbed the illness. So plague victims, covered in distressed poultry, waiting for their symptoms to magically disappear, while medieval doctors stood nearby, nodding confidently, as if they had solved medicine itself. Now, let's continue deeper into medieval filth, horrifying medical failures, and the absolutely nonsensical treatments people believed would save them. Because if you thought covering plague victims in live chickens was bad, buckle up. Because medieval doctors were just getting started. Let's talk about leeches, the medieval medical gold standard for treating almost anything. Headache, leeches. Fever, leeches. Weakness, leeches. Mysterious pain with no explanation. Better slap some leeches on that. Doctors believed that sickness came from bad blood, meaning that removing blood would remove illness. Did this work? Absolutely not. Did medieval doctors do it anyway? Oh, constantly. And did some patients literally just bleed to death because doctors refused to stop? Oh, absolutely. Now let's discuss the absolute nightmare that was medieval childbirth. Because if there was ever a time when hygiene was needed, it was then. But medieval doctors did not prioritize hygiene. They did not wash their hands before assisting with births. And if they were using medical tools, those were also not cleaned properly. In fact, some doctors literally went straight from handling infected wounds to assisting with childbirth, carrying every horrifying germ imaginable, completely unaware that they were spreading death instead of helping. Did anyone connect this to hygiene? No. They blamed bad air, curses, the baby itself, or maybe just the phases of the moon. Because once again, medieval people simply refused to believe filth was the problem. Now, let's visit the barber, surgeon. Because in medieval times, barbers were also doctors, which makes sense if you don't think about it too hard. You could enter a barber shop for a haircut, a tooth extraction, or even light surgery, because apparently, a man trained in trimming beards was also qualified to open wounds and remove infections. The barber's tools, used for everything. The same blade that shaved someone's beard in the morning might amputate a leg by afternoon. And no, it was not cleaned between uses. Did infections follow? Obviously. Did people think to stop this practice? Absolutely not. Because medieval doctors had no concept of germs, and the barber surgeon was cheaper than visiting an actual physician. And now, let's wrap things up with the most hilariously bad medieval health advice ever recorded. Some doctors insisted that looking at bright colors could heal sickness, because apparently pink and yellow were medicinal. Drinking mercury was fine, spoiler. It was not. Eating crushed gemstones could cure disease. Because what's better than wasting money and dying at the same time? Sneezing could reset your health. Because some believed a strong sneeze could literally expel disease from the body. Did any of these work? Absolutely not. Did people believe in them anyway, with full confidence? Because medieval medicine wasn't about logic. It was about superstition, blind optimism, and truly dangerous levels of commitment to nonsense. Now, let's descend further into the depths of medieval hygiene disasters. Where filth was celebrated, superstitions dictated cleanliness practices, and catastrophic medical mistakes were made with absolute confidence. Because if you thought things were bad before, they're about to get worse. Let's begin with the medieval fear of bathing, which was so powerful, it actively shaped how people lived. While some cultures valued regular washing, medieval Europe had a complicated relationship with water. People believed that baths made you weaker, because soaking in warm water opened the pores, allowing sickness to sneak in like an unwanted guest. Cold baths, even worse, because exposing the body to sudden chills was seen as a direct invitation for disease. This meant that people avoided bathing aggressively, and when they did wash, they did so strategically. For example, face and hands. Maybe, because visible filth was socially inconvenient. Feet. Rarely, because why would you waste water on something already covered in mud? Whole body. Only under extreme circumstances, such as your own wedding, or perhaps a royal decree forcing you. And when someone did bathe more than necessary, they were seen as reckless, possibly cursed, and definitely someone you wouldn't want near your livestock. Now, let's explore the superstition-driven cleaning methods, where hygiene wasn't about removing dirt. It was about pleasing the spirits, warding off evil, and avoiding cosmic punishment. Some people believed that rinsing in certain rivers could cure ailments, unless the river was deemed haunted, in which case it would absolutely ruin your life. Burning herbs around the house would clean sickness from the air, even if the real problem was literally the filth on the floor. Washing too often was a sign of vanity, and vanity led to sin, which meant it was better to remain moderately filthy than risk eternal damnation. Carrying scented pouches with strong, smelling ingredients like rosemary or vinegar could act as a protective shield against disease. They did not. Did any of these practices actually help? Not really. But did people believe in them? Absolutely. Because if sickness arrived, it was always someone else's fault. And now, let's revisit the absolute worst medical mistakes, where doctors confidently treated ailments with methods that should have never existed. If you suffered from stomach pain, a doctor might suggest drinking melted gold because consuming wealth was considered a cure. If you had the plague, some doctors recommended cutting open buboes and rubbing them with crushed pigeon, because medieval healthcare was just blind experimentation at its worst. And if you had a lingering cough, some believed that eating wolf liver or powdered snake skin could help, because apparently animals knew the secrets of medicine better than humans did. Did any of these treatments work? No. But doctors kept doing them anyway. Because medieval medicine wasn't about curing people. It was about maintaining the illusion of medical authority while hoping the patient survived despite the treatment. Even deeper into medieval hygiene myths, the complete failure of sanitation laws, and the tragic results of refusing to clean anything properly. Because medieval society, it was determined to ignore filth at all costs. Let's start with medieval city sanitation laws, which theoretically existed, but were not enforced properly. Officials tried to regulate how much waste people could dump in the streets. But realistically, there were too many people and not enough willingness to follow rules. For example, some towns banned dumping waste into public wells, yet people did it anyway, because hauling waste out of town was inconvenient. In busier cities, there were officials tasked with monitoring sanitation, but they were either ignored or bribed into pretending everything was fine. Certain areas were designated as clean zones, but the definition of clean was extremely flexible and often just meant the filth is slightly less visible here. And when streets overflowed with filth, the solution was often to wait for rain, because washing away centuries of poor decisions with bad weather was apparently a valid strategy. Now, let's visit the medieval fear of washing laundry, because even cleaning clothes was treated as a questionable practice. People believed that washing clothes too often weakened the fabric, meaning you should only clean them when absolutely necessary. Too much water exposure could strip the body of natural warmth, so washing clothes during colder seasons was considered reckless. Soap was suspicious, especially strong-smelling varieties, because anything that smelled unnatural might interfere with your body's delicate balance. This meant that some people wore the same garments for months, convinced that their clothing was self-cleansing. Was it actually self-cleansing? No, but medieval society thrived on denial. Finally, let's discuss the horrifying consequences of refusing to clean things properly. Because sanitation failure didn't just mean bad smells, it meant disease outbreaks. And when sickness arrived, people still refused to blame filth. For example, entire villages were struck by skin infections, and instead of questioning hygiene, they blamed witches or unlucky weather. Plague outbreaks swept through cities, yet people believed they were caused by cursed foreigners, not the piles of rotting garbage in the streets. Some communities had mystery fevers, which were likely caused by dirty drinking water, but instead of boiling it, they just prayed harder. Because in medieval society, if something was horrifying and clearly linked to filth, The solution was to pretend filth wasn't the problem. And did this make anything better? Absolutely not. But did people ever change their ways? Barely. Because medieval hygiene wasn't about actual cleanliness. It was about maintaining deeply flawed traditions with full confidence. The streets are thick with the scent of damp earth, sweat, and something else. Something lingering. Something that has absolutely not been cleaned in decades. It clings to the wooden beams of houses, settles into the fabric of tunics, and floats through the air with the confidence of a force that refuses to be questioned. No one stops to complain. No one even notices, because this is normal. This is just how medieval life works. In the market, merchants wave their wares, proudly displaying hunks of meat that have been exposed to the sun longer than anyone should be comfortable with. Flies gather, unbothered, feasting in plain sight, and still, people step forward with coins, nodding as if they've struck a fair deal. The butcher wipes his knife on his apron, a piece of fabric so soaked with layers of past work that it has developed a history of its own. He does not wash it. He does not see a reason to. Further down the street, a baker pulls loaves from his oven, the crust golden, the inside warm, and yet somewhere, deep within the flour, hidden in the dough, there could be a mistake. Because sometimes, when the rye sits too long in damp storerooms, it transforms, carrying a toxin that no one understands. A sickness that does not come from curses or spirits, but from something real, something terrifying, something people refuse to acknowledge. If a whole village eats the wrong bread, they will not say the grain was poisoned. They will say the town has been cursed. They will say the devil has walked among them. They will scream and shake and see visions, and not one person will blame the baker. Because that would make too much sense. A man coughs violently near the town well, doubling over, gripping his sides as though something inside him is breaking apart. People glance at him, wary, calculating, but not with concern. No one asks if he has been drinking the water. No one questions if the well has been contaminated. No one suggests that maybe, just maybe, the waste dumped so carelessly into nearby streets has seeped into the town's most vital resource. Instead, they whisper about the air. The air must be bad today. The alignment of the planets must be wrong. Someone, somewhere, must have invited this sickness through their sins. And so the well remains open. The water remains tainted. The people remain sick. At the bathhouse, steam curls through the doorway, carrying the scent of herbs and warmth, and something that should be inviting. But the streets beyond hold their ground, the people outside remain firm, and those who dare enter are regarded with skepticism. Bathing is dangerous, after all. Bathing is for the reckless, the weak, the ones who do not understand that a body must carry its defenses like armor. A man steps inside. Someone watches him go and mutters, "He won't last the season." And the crowd nods because of course, that must be true. A woman scrubs a cloth against the stone steps of her home, working furiously, trying to erase a stain. Trying to fight against something no one else is willing to fight. Someone passes by and watches her for a moment before shaking their head. "You'll wash away your luck," they warn, because superstition is more trusted than sanitation. And she hesitates for only a second before setting the cloth down. Uncertain now, unsure if cleanliness is worth the risk. Doctors shuffle between patients, their hands touching wounds, their blades cutting flesh, their tools carried from one body to the next without pause. They do not rinse their hands. They do not clean their instruments. They do not see the need. The patient who survives is credited with strength. The one who does not was simply never meant to live. Bloodletting continues as the standard cure for nearly everything. A man, pale and shaking, grips the edge of a chair as the physician calmly drains more blood, nodding as if this is the logical solution. As if removing the very thing keeping him alive is undoubtedly the right course of action. In the grand hall of a castle, nobles dine beneath towering wooden beams, surrounded by tapestries thick with dust. Draped in fabrics that have absorbed years of sweat and fine scents masking the truth. The table is covered in platters of roasted meat, thick sauces, wines poured into silver goblets. There are no forks, no napkins, no sense of restraint. Grace coats fingertips, wine stains sleeves, and when the meal is done, they do not wipe down the table. They simply leave. Because tomorrow, the servants will shake out the cloth, spread fresh rushes on the floor, and pretend the filth has disappeared. The garderobe, tucked within the castle walls, carries the weight of centuries of use. A direct chute leading into the open air, sending everything unfortunate into the moat below. The smell lingers, crawling through stone corridors, settling into heavy tapestries, and still no one complains. Because this is how castles work. This is how nobility lives. And if the air is thick with something that should not be inhaled, well, that is simply the cost of grandeur. A priest stands before the congregation, speaking of purity, of morality, of the dangers of vanity, and somewhere within his words, a warning about washing. To clean too much is indulgent. To care too much about hygiene is sinful. And the people listen, nodding, accepting, because if the church says cleanliness is a risk, then surely it must be. And so, the streets remain thick with filth. The wells remain questionable. The doctors remain misguided. The homes remain dust-laden. And the people continue as they always have, wrapped in layers of tradition, superstition, and the quiet, unshaken confidence that this is simply how life is meant to be. The night settles over the town, thick with the weight of unwashed bodies, damp wool, and the quiet resignation of a world that has never truly questioned its own habits. Doors creak shut, candles flicker in dusty windows, and the streets, still layered with the residue of 1,000 careless steps, remain as they always have. Cloaked in filth, ignored by all. Inside the homes, people pull blankets over themselves, fabric stiff with layers of sweat and dust, fibers clinging to skin that has not been rinsed in weeks. A fire crackles, sending faint smoke into the rafters, curling against wooden beams blackened by years of indoor flames and refusal to clean them. The room is warm, but not fresh. Nothing is fresh. Nothing has been fresh in centuries. In the corner, a child sneezes. A pause follows brief, filled with apprehension. Because sneezing is a sign, a warning, a moment when illness may announce itself. The mother stands, crossing herself, muttering a quiet prayer. She does not reach for medicine. There is no medicine. There is only faith, and the deeply held belief that sickness does not come from filth, from the thick grime on the floor, or the layer of dust settling into their lungs. It comes from something unseen, something intangible, something they cannot control. At the monastery, a monk lights incense, waving the smoke through the halls, warding off the foul air. He believes this will cleanse the sickness, push it away, force it from the heavy stones and thick tapestries, but the sickness does not care. It lingers, unseen, spreading, moving through corridors where men kneel in prayer, heads bowed, hands folded, trusting that they can beg illness away without ever washing their hands. In the alley behind the butcher's stall, a rat scurries through scraps of discarded meat, gnawing eagerly, its body sleek, its presence unnoticed. It moves through gaps in doors, through storerooms, through spaces that have never been truly sealed, carrying with it the quiet promise of another outbreak. But no one looks at the rat. No one wonders if it is the source of their suffering. When sickness comes, they will blame the wind, the stars, the gods, but never the creatures living among them, never the filth they refuse to acknowledge. A healer dabs vinegar onto a wound, convinced that its sharp scent will drive infection away. The bandage is rough cloth, once used by another patient, rinsed but not truly cleaned, tied tightly over skin that is already hot, already swelling, already on the brink of something worse. He does not see the problem. He does not know that his hands carry the sickness from one patient to the next, that his touch does not heal. It spreads. But he is confident, assured, convinced of his own skill. At the castle, the servants lay fresh rushes on the floor, covering the old ones, layering over filth rather than removing it, masking smells instead of erasing them. The nobles enter, breathing deep, remarking on the pleasant scent of newly cut herbs, ignoring the rot beneath them, stepping lightly over the history of their own refusal to clean properly. And outside, in the town, the bathhouse stands silent, its steam rising against the night, waiting, offering something dangerous, something indulgent, something unnecessary. The people pass by, heads down, coats wrapped tight, clutching their filth like protection, like armor, like proof that they have resisted the temptation of water. Because bathing is a mistake. Bathing is a risk. Bathing invites sickness. And so, the town remains as it always has, wrapped in layers of tradition, superstition, and dirt. Thick, unshaken, undeniable. A reality they do not question. A reality they do not resist. A reality they believe in with full confidence. No matter how much it may be killing them. The dawn breaks over the rooftops, the light stretching across the town, revealing exactly what no one wants to see. The streets, thick with the remnants of the previous day, the discarded scraps, the unnoticed stains, the refuse casually left to settle where it may. The smell shifts as the morning air stirs it, blending the dampness of overnight rain with the reality that nothing ever truly disappears. A merchant steps onto his threshold, stretching, yawning, blinking at the mess in front of his shop. He does not frown. He does not curse. He simply moves past it, stepping around a pile of something that should have been cleared long ago, but never was. There is no urgency, no concern, because this is how things have always been, and no one bothers questioning it anymore. The baker opens his doors, the scent of fresh bread spilling into the streets, carrying with it something richer, heavier. Something that lingers too long. Something from the storeroom that hasn't been properly cleaned in years. He barely notices the flies gathering at the window, barely registers the way they settle on the loaves, untouched, unbothered. Part of the background now, nothing more than a fact of life. A woman pours water from a wooden bucket, rinsing her hands, wiping them dry against the front of her dress, which has absorbed enough of daily toil that the fabric itself carries a scent she pretends isn't there. The water she used will drain into the earth, seeping into the stones, trickling toward the well, where others will gather soon, dipping their cups, drinking deep, never once asking whether it has mixed with things best left unseen. A child scurries past, barefoot, stepping through the filth with perfect ease, laughter bubbling as he weaves between carts, between stalls, between people who have accepted that no street will ever truly be clean. His feet will be washed eventually, but only just enough. Only when the dirt has built up beyond acceptable levels. Only when someone bothers to notice. A man stops to speak with a neighbor. leaning against a wall that has gathered dust thick enough to alter its color, rubbing his hand absently against it as they talk, leaving behind smudges that have been traded between hands for years, layered upon each other like paint on a canvas. No one realizes they are creating. The conversation drifts to news of another fever spreading nearby, a sickness moving between towns, a shadow creeping close. He speaks of it with an air of inevitability, as if it is simply another season rolling in. The neighbor nods, sighs, adjusts the strap of his satchel, and mutters, "Must be the bad air again." A healer passes through the square, her bag weighed down with remedies, herbs wrapped in cloth, tinctures prepared with practiced care. She grips them tightly, determined, hopeful, convinced that they will help. But when she reaches her patient, when she sees the wound thick with infection, when she opens the bandages that have been tied too long, untouched for days, she realizes that nothing she carries will be enough, because the sickness does not come from spirits. It does not come from the wind. It does not come from fate. It comes from something that no one is willing to change. And so the town continues moving, breathing, living as it always has, wrapped in the quiet, unbreakable belief that this is just how life is meant to be. The lanterns flicker in the distance, their golden glow settling over the streets, softening the rough edges of a town that has long surrendered to the weight of its own filth. The night air is thick, wrapped in the scent of damp, wood, smoke, and the quiet resignation of lives untouched by water, untouched by cleanliness, untouched by change. But tonight you can rest. Tonight, you do not have to question the filth, the traditions, the superstition clinging to every surface. Tonight, you simply let it be. Pull the blankets tighter. Let the dust settle without complaint. Close your eyes, knowing that medieval life does not ask for hygiene. It simply asks for endurance. Sleep well. Unlike the man who dared to bathe this morning. Because by tomorrow, the town will be whispering about him. And he will absolutely regret everything